Here at Charlie Crimebuster, we welcome comments, suggestions, opinions, and whether you agree or disagree with our view on a topic, we still want to hear from you. Reach out with a shout-out. Email Charlie at charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Or you can call or text us at 407-917-2211. That's 407-917-2211. And we'd like to thank our sponsor, PeacemakerNetwork.com, and also thank those of you who already support our podcast. Did you know that your donations not only help with this podcast, but also support the brave men and women, first responders, law enforcement, correction officers, security personnel, and our military? You too can donate, as well as become a monthly badge member. That's BADGE member by simply subscribing to PeacemakerNetwork.com. That's PeacemakerNetwork.com. And if you're a true crime junkie, we would like to encourage you to binge-cast by listening to our podcasts located on many of the popular podcast platforms. Simply search for Charlie Crimebuster, or you can ask your smart speaker to play Charlie Crimebuster. But since you're streaming us here on YouTube tonight, simply click on the subscribe button and you'll be notified each time we drop a new episode. So please do us that huge favor and press that subscribe button right now. And we thank you.
The Karen Reed re-murder trial, it's called the retrial of the century, and the verdict is in. James Buckland and I, we're going to talk about breaking news on this episode of Charlie's Crime Talk. Welcome aboard. James, what a day, huh?
Wow, what a day. I was actually surprised that the jury asked so many questions.
Yeah, they were asking a couple of questions that I think got a lot of people concerned, and well, I'd say a lot of people, kind of wondering what those questions meant,
Right. The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals interviewed or participating and do not represent those of Charlie Crimebuster nor Peacemaker Network. All individuals described or mentioned in the presentation should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This presentation contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions, which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener and viewer discretion is advised. Yeah, it was a very, very, very busy, interesting day.
Yes, and it was just amazing that, at one point, if you were watching, the jury sent some slip out to the judge, and she sealed it, and they said, no, we're not done. And so they went back again, so it had people quite confused about what was really going on.
Yeah, it did. Well, like we talked about before on our previous, crime talks, is the fact that this trial had every aspect. I mean, both trials, 1 and 2, had every possible, conceivable, trainable component in it that you would want to use in an academy, or even, for law enforcement in the future. There's a whole myriad of things that occurred in these two trials, rather.
Yeah, it really was amazing trial. I mean, the first one as well, but this second one, I guess more people probably had tuned in because they were much more aware of what was going on at the time. I've heard one of the things that was really interesting about this is very, very few times can you ever imagine that you have a defendant, where a police officer has been killed and someone has been charged with that, and have such a groundswell of popular support as she had. I mean, people were cheering her as she went to court, and when she came out, I'm sure she probably didn't like to be a celebrity of that fashion, but she became one overnight with this case.
Well, what does that say about the law enforcement for that particular city?
The one thing, though, it kind of reminded me of, but in a reverse type of way, was the O.J. Simpson trial. I mean, you think of all the people that he had supporting him,
right?
And at that point too, it became basically a case. The case kind of moved away from O.J. Simpson to it becoming a case against the police,
Right.
And I think you see the same type of thing here, only kind of in a little different fashion there. but it also became the same. No, it doesn't say very good things about the police at all. It really is a bad day for law enforcement with this trial. Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
I mean, the case, even the investigation was just all messed up.
Yeah, it was a terrible, terrible investigation, and I don't know. I really think that because it was such a messed up, crazy investigation that did not follow protocol and did so many things that you do not do in an investigation. I just don't know, James, that we will ever really know what really happened to John O'Keefe.
I believe that there's going to be an additional investigation.
You think so, huh?
I believe so. Yeah, there's there's enough there's enough probable cause. The fact that she's found not guilty, and there's enough, of the Alberts moving. They're getting rid of the dog. Higgins and Alberts both got rid of their phones. Way too many things that were suspicious.
Yeah, but here, the real problem, James, is that for that case to go forward, it would take the prosecution to be willing to do that. And if they did that, they would basically be admitting that they made a big mistake all the way around. And it's
True,
very, very difficult to ever
true,
see a prosecutor. I mean, even in situations, if you recall, there are times when DNA has come back and said this guy didn't do it, but still prosecutors will still fight it, even though it's very
true.
evident that happens. They still fight it. Something about the prosecution that just does not want to back up and say that we made a mistake. And in order for them to prosecute, uh, anybody, Brian Higgins or the Alberts or anybody else in this case, they would have to admit, boy, we really blew it. And I would tell you that right now, if you went there to Canton, if you went into that city, you would find the prosecution and the police department and law enforcement would still be saying, without a shadow of a doubt, they think Karen Reed did it.
Yeah,
And
I,
this verdict, though it causes Karen Reed to be not guilty, I don't think it will change the police's mind or the prosecutor's mind as far as that goes. I will say this though, I thought it was very, very. I thought I respected Brennan a great deal when they came down to that one charge where she was charged for DUI. They call it OUI there, operating under the influence. We call it DUI here in Florida, driving
right,
under the influence. I did think it was very, very big of him to go to the judge right then, rather than for her have to wait and come back to court for a sentence,
right.
and basically say, "Hey, we'll do what we do with anybody with the first time DUI. We'll give you a year's probation, and you go through some sort of program, you know."
Right, right.
And I thought I thought that was very big of Brennan,
That was good.
because he could have come back and said no, he could have given her up to 2 years
Oh yeah,
for
yeah,
DUI. You
yeah.
could do that, but that wouldn't be very fair because any first time offender that they don't usually do that. So I do think that was very graceful on his part to do that.
I agree. I agree. It's also interesting too is that, she's been in trial for what, 19 months, almost 20,
Three
almost two.
years, about 3 years
Is
altogether.
that, is it 3 years
Well,
total?
since the time that she was charged, yeah,
Oh, okay, okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So,
That's a
yeah, I mean, that's that much time, could be taken. I mean, he's obviously taken off that time from her having to be in
hmm
court all that time. So,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
but it was good. I mean, it was good that that was actually a very, very professional move on his part. I have to, yeah, you're right. Must respect a guy that knows how to concede gracefully.
And I think the judge too, because the judge didn't have to go along with that recommendation, and
Oh, that's true too.
she did as well. So I think that move was very, very classy, and the jury says she's not guilty. So it would be wrong, in my opinion, to pile it on the DUI simply because you got a not guilty on the other.
Right,
And
exactly.
but there are times in cases where that doesn't happen. There are times when they're sore losers and they'll just pour it on.
Oh, yeah. Well, how would you judge the lawyers in this case? I mean, we had
Yeah,
several lawyers for the
yeah.
defense.
Well, we said in the last podcast, we said that I mentioned that these lawyers, I was, talking about Brennan and his predicate, what he had done. I talked about Alan Jackson. Basically, after I was talking about him, I said, "Hey, folks, let me just summarize it up. These guys are top guns. Like the
True.
the pilots, that are the top guns.
Yep.
They are top guns in the legal profession, no doubt about it. We had the opportunity, the public who followed this trial, we had the opportunity, I think, of seeing some of the most brilliant attorneys argue the case that we've probably ever seen out there. I don't know when I've ever seen as good of attorneys as both of them were.
Hmm.
Even Brennan, Brennan, I think, did an outstanding job with what he had. I
He
mean,
did.
he didn't have many cards to go with
No.
the way that the investigation was loused up, but I think he did exceptional. I think he did a lot better than the first district attorney did. Although I have heard, in some of the things I've been hearing and reading and reviewing, that first jury, that there were several on the jury that was voting guilty. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
yeah, I think about nine of them, and so actually the other guy did better as far as getting the guilties
Uh-huh.
with a hung jury than Brennan did. But I think, I think Brennan did a great job. I will say I think he kind of wound down at the end, and I think he started out really good, going strong. Two terrible things happened. I think that really cost him a lot of points with the jury. The one thing was the education, mishap with the aperture
Yep.
expert.
Right.
Brennan, we know that Brennan knew that he did not have that degree because everybody else that he brought on the stand, he would always ask them,
Exactly.
tell me where you went to school, this or that. He didn't say anything about that.
That's
So
right.
he kind of went along with the website's lie that this guy had a degree, and I think that made him look very small in the eyes of the jury.
Yeah.
And the second one, wow, was a big one when he took that shirt and had it up there behind the witness stand and pulled it up real quick and say, "See all these cuts in the shirt? Doesn't that say that?" That he was hit by the car, and he was
Right.
drug road rage, and the cuts was done by the criminals, what even,
Exactly.
boy, I'm glad the defense found that out
Right.
and brought that out because, but even the witness, if you remember there, I think it was Crash Daddy, wasn't it? Yeah, it was Crash Daddy. Even Dr. Wolf, even though he looked at that shirt and you can see he was kind of puzzled. He looked at that thing and he said, that's not consistent with road rage.
Yeah.
The cuts, even the cuts aren't. I mean, he didn't know how those cuts got there, but
Yeah.
he knew that it wasn't consistent with road rage. Road rage. I
Exactly.
mean, road rash. I'm sorry.
Uh, well, I was
Yeah.
listening to the medical examiner and watching her across with Brennan, and she knew how to hold her own. I mean, he was trying to get her trap her on the Guzman coma, and she said no, that's the
Oh yeah.
Glasgow coma.
Right.
And then also she pointed out she kept saying multiple. She kept saying fractures, plural,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
fracture. At the
Yeah.
back, the base of the skull. It was
Yeah. She
fractures,
did.
plural.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And Dr. Russell, boy, how she stood up to Brennan.
oh yeah, there you go.
I mean, I thought that was just, the more he tried, and I know that one question, I'm sure he regrets that he asked when he said, "Hey, if you had known that she had confessed that she had done this deed, wouldn't that change your mind?" And she said, "No, not whatsoever." And then she brought in, the grief syndrome, that
Right,
people have
right.
when they do that. That had not been introduced at that point. I mean, he started out he started out the trial saying she said she did it, she did it, she did it,
Yep.
I
Yep.
mean, he was hitting that thing hard and she just took that right out from under him,
Uh-huh.
with one question,
Exactly.
took that right out from under. And that wasn't Alan Jackson that did that. That was a witness on the stand, just a very good witness who knew how to stand up to a strong cross-examination.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, what do you think about the judge?
A lot of people think that the judge was very biased toward the prosecution. And I think I thought there were times when some of her rulings I agreed with and some of them I did not agree with. But all in all, I don't think that she was that biased. I think she was trying to stay, on top of. Can you imagine being the judge handling these two high-powered, ego-driven lawyers? I
Right.
mean,
Right.
that would be very hard to keep controlling. I mean, go back to the one example we used at the beginning of the program, the O.J. Simpson trial. Look how the judge let that thing get just off the rails, and
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
she never did allow that to happen. I mean, she ran a pretty doggone tight courtroom. I do think that a lot of her decisions on the rulings and the motions lean toward the prosecution, but all in all, I think she did okay. What do you think?
Well, I listened to several of her when she would sustain on in favor of the prosecution. And one of the things that really upset me when I was listening to the different audios, I was just listening to the audio part,
Right.
was that when the defense was asking or either cross or even direct questioning, they wouldn't even get the question all the way out, and he was objecting. And she
Yeah.
wasn't saying, "Well, let him finish answering the question." She was saying, "Sustain," before they even had a chance to finish the question.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
my concern. Was like she didn't allow the defense to actually go through asking the question in full,
Right.
and so
Right.
they had to rephrase or find another way of asking the question without even getting the first question all the way out, which I thought was
Yeah.
really unfair.
Yeah. And of course, one of the crazy things about this was, Brennan is has been a prosecutor before. I'm not saying this isn't the first case he ever prosecuted, but he's really known as a defense attorney.
Hmm.
And a defense attorney, by subject of what they do, is they ask a lot of leading questions because mostly they're cross-examining
Right.
the witness, and so you can do a leading question there. But he was asking leading questions continuously
Oh yeah.
as a prosecutor, which sometimes Jackson objected to, but she let him get away with a whole
She
lot of
let
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
she did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do think she did that. There was a lot of leeway there. I did not like the idea either. In a lot of trials, when you hear objections, the attorney then will say why he is objecting or she is objecting.
Right.
And Judge kind of she did not have that. She would not let them say
Exactly.
what is the base of my objection. She wouldn't
Right.
allow it. She just said you just say object, and then she would rule. I think it's good when an attorney can say objection on this grounds.
Right.
I think that kind of shows it shows the jury, what why this attorney is objected. I think that's good things for the jury to know.
I agree. Speaking of the jury, do you think they made the right decision?
Absolutely, absolutely. As you said when we first were talking tonight, that's exactly what we predicted would
Yeah.
happen, and it
Well, you
did.
called it.
Yeah, it's the it is it's they voted just the way I would vote if I was a jury.
Yep.
During the last podcast, we asked the jury to get in the jury's seat, and then we laid out the evidence for the prosecution, the evidence for the defense, and at the end, I said I would vote not guilty on those two, and nail her on the DUI.
Right. Well, if the defense had not added the OUI, what would have impacted the decision, do you think?
I really thought about that. I kind of think that it was brilliant Alan Jackson and by the way, the defense is the one that argued for that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Wasn't the prosecution.
Exactly.
This is really different because the defense said, there is a lesser charge in here, and we would like for it to be a part of it,
Right.
and they got it. I think it was brilliant because, you're sitting in that jury room. Think about this, and you know that somebody has died.
Right.
You have to feel bad about that. You have to feel like, hey, I have some sort of obligation here,
Right.
for this person, and there's a good chance if she had not been driving that night as intoxicated, they may not have even ended up there. But I'm not saying that caused it, but I do think that at least gave the jury, I think, a little more courage to be able to make this decision and say, hey, let's be fair about this. No doubt about it. I mean, she admitted that she had several drinks that day.
Yep.
They did test her that morning. It was interesting though that they were asking about the DUI. One of the questions was, "Are we talking about at 12:45 or 5 a.m. in the morning?"
Exactly. Yep.
Which I thought that says these guys are really thinking this thing through
They are. Yeah.
because that breathalyzer, or when they tested her blood alcohol 9 or 10 or in the middle of the day, whatever time they did it that morning, that would not given you a true picture of what happened at 12:45, but
Exactly.
it would at 5 a.m. in the morning, and we know she was driving at 5 a.m. in the morning.
Right.
Plus there was the voicemail. So yeah, I think that the first jury, they did not have that out that this jury had, and
Hmm.
they were hung. So I think it was good. What do you think?
I think they did have a, a good, they had a good amount of evidence that they could go through, that they could comb through to actually get to the base as to what really happened. And I think they actually, after weighing every bit of evidence, they said, you know what, we're, we're just going to have to get her on the. And I think the interview played a big part of that too. The television interview that she admitted she
Yeah,
had been driving
yeah.
drunk. So I think
Yeah,
that
yeah,
hurt her as well.
that really did hurt. The only mistake that I would think that I saw, uh, well, not the only, but the mistake that was glaring to me by the defense was that they allowed her to get out and have all that access to all these interviews.
Yeah.
That I think really hurt. I think that was probably the strongest part of Brennan's case
Well, one of the
was
questions
him
that Jerry asked was,
was yeah, yeah.
can we consider her interviews as part of evidence?
Yeah, because I mean, what do attorneys tell you all the time? You have a right to be silent. Be silent.
Yeah, exactly.
Because attorneys can take your words and you can have the best of intentions and they can turn them and twist them to
Exactly.
really can really cause you problems and that really happened to her in this case. She said way too much. And I think that's going to be that was a problem, what was a problem, no doubt about it. That she did this. So, and I think too, getting back to the question about having that one charge there, I think that helped the jury to say to themselves, "We're being fair about this."
Right. Right.
We are being fair. We're not
Definitely.
we're not going one side or the other. We're like you said, we're looking at all the evidence. They
Right.
they did not prove this without reasonable doubt. They didn't prove this without reasonable doubt,
Yep.
but they certainly proved without reasonable doubt that she was driving under the influence. By the way, she sure wasn't the only person in this
Exactly.
case that was
Exactly.
arguing. That whole crew up there. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, they would say that one of the things that they brought out was that that the cops up there drive and drink, and I believe they do, man. There were several police officers that was drinking that night and driving.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
In fact, John O'Keefe was one of the ones that wasn't.
Exactly.
And he's the one that ended up getting killed. But yeah, yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I think it was a brilliant move.
Let's take a break for the first segment here, and let's remind our listeners that this program is sponsored by PeacemakerNetwork.com, and also the music and sound effects are provided by Pixabay.com. And let you tell us about the crazy crook story.
Well, our crazy crook story of the last week of the podcast, Speaking of going to jail, and she doesn't have to go to jail for that DUI because she's first offender. But this one guy was in jail, and he got out of jail. And so when you get out of jail, you got to get home, right? And if you don't have a lot of friends, some friend to pick you up, family member to pick you up, how are you going to get home? I know at our jail in Volusia County, sometimes we will provide a inmate with money for a taxi and that sort of thing. Well, this guy decided a unique way to get home after he was released from prison. He actually hijacked a big transfer truck, and on that transfer truck was $1.25 million worth of Corvettes.
Oh my goodness.
And he had saddled up to this guy at a truck stop and befriended him. And when he got in the cab, he pushed him out and he hijacked the truck. Now, if you're just getting out of prison, it's probably not a good idea to go out and commit a crime right, before you get home, right?
Exactly.
It's even not a good idea. And if you are going to steal something, why don't you steal a bike, or a motorcycle,
Yeah.
or a car? I mean, that happens all the time, right? I mean,
Right.
and police don't really notice that as much. I mean, they'll do what they can, but they're not going to spend a lot of effort on those kind of crimes.
Right.
But you talk about $1.25 million of merch.
Yeah.
I believe that's going to get the attention of the popo, don't you?
Oh, definitely. Most
Yeah,
definitely.
and so they then when they tried to run him down, he tried to run off, and then finally he stopped and he couldn't go any further, and then they caught him and they arrested him. So this idiot that decided for his way home from prison to hijack a carrier with $1.25 million of Corvettes on it, that's our idiot of the week.
Crazy crook of the week. All right. Go back to our discussion
Excuse me.
with Karen Reed. What was the best moments that stood out to you during this case, the second case, the second trial?
Well, I think I loved the Perry Mason moments that we talked about in the trial.
Yep, there was quite a few.
Yeah, and one was, of course, that when that poor guy was caught with that lie about his education, I thought that was
Yep.
that was an amazing moment. And the moment when Brennan was caught with that deal as well. Um, but I really also thought that Jackson's closing was phenomenal. Whenever he said this phrase, he said, "Reasonable doubt." See, he said, you may say, "I think she did it." He said, but that's not above reasonable doubt.
Right.
You might say she could have done it. Excuse me, but that's not above reasonable doubt. You could say she more than likely did it, and that's not above reasonable doubt. I
Right.
think he really, really sealed that for the jury there.
Yeah. Well, he made it very clear what reasonable doubt consists
Exactly,
of. Yeah.
exactly, and that's been hard for a lot of juries.
Sure.
It's not it's not that you don't have doubt, but is it reasonable doubt?
Right. Right.
And what does reasonable doubt mean? So I thought that was a real key to it. And of course, the uh, the greatest experts I think I've ever heard is the archive guys.
Yeah, they were really good, especially Dr. Wolf. He was amazing.
Yeah, they were
Yeah.
they were phenomenal. They were phenomenal in the first trial, and they were even better in the second trial.
Yeah. I think they were better prepared for the second one, obviously.
Yeah.
Well, do you think there will ever be justice for John O'Keefe, Charlie?
No, I don't. I don't think we're ever going to know what
Why not?
happened to him.
Why not?
Well, just like I said at the beginning, the prosecution's not going to. They're not going to prosecute this. The law enforcement's not going to prosecute it. You say, well, what about the feds? Well, they've already investigated. They investigated the investigation, and basically they said, that there was fault on the part of the police department.
Hmm.
But there were no charges. There wasn't any law broke. Uh, it's for the same reason that Karen Reed could not be convicted of this crime. The investigation is just too far gone to really
Yeah.
bring anybody to because even though there is certainly suspicious activity by a lot of these people. I don't think that any of that activity could be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. So I think you would be right back to the same place,
Hmm.
because you could argue away all these other things. You could argue away you cause reasonable doubt, because the guys got rid of their phones, but both guys were police officers, and both guys probably knew that their phones were going to be taken because they have that experience as police officers.
Hmm. Hmm.
And look what happened to Proctor when they got his phone, right?
Right,
So,
right.
probably lots of people out there have certain things on their phone they wouldn't want the public to know about,
That's true.
which may
Yep.
or may not have anything to do with crime, but just embarrassing stuff. So you could argue that away. I mean, I think that there's a lot of suspicious activity out there, but because this was investigated. Now, if this had been investigated, if they had gone into the house that night, if they had declared it a crime scene, if they had found some sort of evidence in the basement there,
Hmm.
before he refloored his basement, if they had separated the witnesses,
Hmm.
if they had taken a picture of John O'Keefe right there where he was in the lawn before they moved him, if
Right.
they had taken pictures of every piece of evidence that they found, if they had investigated this correctly, I think we might have justice for John O'Keefe. And I'm not saying who did it, because I don't think we can know who did it, because of the fact that this was investigated very, very terribly. So no, I don't think that there's going to be justice for John O'Keefe. The one way that there might be justice for John O'Keefe, because he is, in my mind, a hero, because he's a police officer, and not all police officers are bad or crooked, and we know that there are very few of them when you think of the thousands and millions of them in the world. But the one thing that could get him justice is if police officers, law enforcement agencies, prosecutors will learn from this case.
Agree.
If they can
Yep.
learn from this case,
Yep.
then I think we can do something for the memory and in honor of John O'Keefe,
Right.
to get him some justice. That he, I believe in the afterlife, and I believe then he could, John could look down and say at that point, "Hey, man, something good came out of this."
Right. Right.
That prosecutors, police officers realize that they cannot be biased when they're investigating a case,
Right. Right.
and departments have to follow proper procedure. What about you?
I'm the same belief. I'm of the fact that they need to use proper, chain of
Yeah,
custody. They need to
yeah,
use, use gloves when they collect evidence, not use a leaf blower when they try to remove
yeah,
snow. Don't
yeah. Or
use solo
or
cups.
red solo cups. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, there's way too many things that just popped up in my mind.
Yeah, that will be remembered forever, won't it? Those
It will
red
be.
solo cups. Yeah,
It will be.
yeah.
So what do you think is next for Karen Reed?
Well, I think she's going to face a civil trial, more than likely, just like O.J. Simpson did. And it's according to what attorney she gets. Remember, in a civil trial, it's not unanimous. It's just a majority of the
Hmm.
people saying it.
Right.
So, uh, whichever, if when the civil trial, it's going to cost a lot of money, and if she can get attorneys like she had for the criminal trial, to support her, and maybe even go after. Hey, if we win this case, we want some money, because she had to spend this money for it. Then maybe we'll be, yeah. So I think she'll face a civil trial, but civil trial is a lot different than going to jail, right?
That's true. That's true. Do you think that did they say anything about any stipulation about her writing a book or getting a book or publication rights?
No, no, she's innocent, man. She can do whatever she
Okay,
wants to do,
good.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
no, she can do that. Now, the only thing is that if there is a civil trial, then the civil trial can attach any proceeds from
Right.
something like that,
Right.
like they did with O.J. Simpson. They could do that, and that might be one of the reasons why they want to do it. If she does, they might say, "Hey, we don't think it's right for her to profit over our son's death for the family." that sort of thing, as long as that goes. But yeah, she can write books, but she's probably going to be they're probably going to sue. Now, I have heard too that there could be a possibility that she could turn around and sue for malicious prosecution.
Oh, that's true too.
And so
Yeah.
that could happen too. I doubt that'll happen, but there is that possibility. So, it's still going to be a hard. I think it's going to be tough for Karen Reed, just like it was for O.J. Simpson. The crazy thing about O.J. Simpson is the longer from there, the more of a villain he became
Yeah.
in the eyes of the nation. I don't think that'll happen with Karen Reed. But I do think that there's going to be a civil trial. I would be interesting. It'd be interesting to me to know if she would use the same attorneys to help her, through the civil trial. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Normally they don't, but it'd be very helpful for her. And if they could, if she could get that same kind of representation and bring that same evidence in, they may not even be able to, to beat her in a civil trial.
That's very possible. I mean, Alyssa and Jackson both are really good, you know, litigators. So
I tell you what really would be strange, wouldn't it? Brennan does defense in civil trials.
And there you go.
Wouldn't that be a twist? So suddenly she has a civil trial and she has Brennan as her defense attorney with a civil trial.
There we go. Wow, you really tossed that one out there. That's good.
Yeah,
Charlie. That was
yeah.
good, Charlie. Well, speaking of interesting scenarios, what's next for Charlie Crimebuster now?
Well, the next big one coming down the pike, as we know this summer, is going to be Kohlberger and the Idaho student murders. So we
Right.
might start laying some groundwork for that.
Okay.
I think we already, there was another guilty plea. I think, or a guilty verdict this past week was Lori Vallow when she
Right.
defended herself.
Right.
I've thought about, Lori Vallow defended herself as her own attorney, and so did Bundy defended himself as his own attorney. I
Ted
thought
Bundy.
about going
Yep.
back and say, which one of those were the best attorneys?
And bring up a chart and show comparisons.
Here's how I'll tell you, Lori Vallow was doing pretty doggone good
Yeah.
at defending herself for a layperson. And yet Bundy, he had actually gone to law school, So,
Yeah. Right.
so I guess these guys that know they're going to spend the rest of their life in prison. They say, "Hey, what have I got to lose? Let me have some fun. Pretend I'm an attorney." 'Cause both of them in their life. So we've got a lot of interesting things coming down the pike, and a lot of trials out there, and a lot of. One thing about it with, unfortunately, this is not really a good thing, but with true crime, there's always something to talk about, right?
That's true. That's true.
Yep.
Yep.
All right. Well, folks, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you being a part of this special podcast on this breaking news. Karen Reed is now found not guilty. And this is what a lot of people have been waiting for. We got the verdict, and we hope that we've been able to bring you some good information. And we can't wait to see you next week for another Charlie Crimebuster episode. So until next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster reminding you, stay safe, stay alert. Yep, for the life you save, it could be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. You can find additional podcasts at charliecrimebuster.com. You can also support our first responders, military, and law enforcement communities at peacemakernetwork.com. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel using tag @CharlieCrimebuster. Even visit our Facebook page, facebook.com/CharlieCrimebuster. Or if you would like to make suggestions for future podcasts, please send your ideas to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us next week for another exciting crime story with Charlie Crimebuster.